At 6:14 on a Tuesday morning, Mark is sitting alone inside his SUV in a Costco parking lot staring at a number that instantly ruins his mood. His daughter's soccer bag is lying across the back seat, his coffee has already gone cold in the cup holder, and the engine is still running because he completely forgot to turn the car off almost 10 minutes ago. On the screen of his phone is an article claiming that the average 45-year-old American in 2026 has nearly $1 million in net worth. And the longer he stares at the headline, the more it starts to feel like somebody is describing a completely different country. Mark is 45 years old, and Mark does not have $1 million. What Mark does have is a retirement account that he avoids checking because every time he opens the app, he spends the rest of the day quietly stressed. He has a mortgage that somehow feels heavier now than it did years ago, even though he has been making payments consistently. He has a credit card balance that never fully disappears, no matter how aggressively he tries paying it down. He has a son who needs braces, a daughter who wants to start travel soccer, and a mother whose memory has started fading in ways the family still avoids discussing directly. And like millions of Americans in their mid 40s, Mark is trying to answer one deeply uncomfortable question that quietly follows him through ordinary moments of life. Did I fail financially, or was this entire system designed to feel impossible? My name is Oliver, and today we are going to find out exactly where the average 45-year-old stands in 2026, because the numbers people constantly repeat online are technically accurate, while also being emotionally misleading at the exact same time. According to recent Federal Reserve data, the average American household, led by someone between 45 and 54 years old, has a net worth approaching $1 million. Depending on the report, the number usually lands somewhere between $950,000 and $1 million, and every few months that statistic spreads across social media like a financial horror story disguised as motivation. Because if you are 45 years old right now, your life probably does not feel remotely close to millionaire territory. You may own a house, you may have retirement savings, and you may even earn more money than you ever imagined making when you were younger. But you probably also feel like one major emergency could destabilize the entire machine holding your life together. The reason for that disconnect comes down to one dangerous word that completely changes how people interpret these statistics: average, because averages become heavily distorted when extremely wealthy people are included in the calculation. If you place 9 exhausted middle-class parents in a room with a billionaire hedge fund manager, statistically, everyone in that room suddenly becomes incredibly wealthy, even though nothing about the real lives of those parents has changed. The math technically works, but emotionally and practically, the number becomes useless. The number that actually matters is median net worth, because the median person represents the exact middle of the country. That person is wealthier than half the population and poorer than the other half, which means the median reflects real life far better than the average ever could. And the median 45-year-old American household is nowhere near $1 million. The real number is closer to $250,000 in total net worth, and even that statistic hides far more than most people realize. Because once you look underneath the surface, the average middle-aged American stops looking secretly wealthy and starts looking financially stretched in ways that are much more familiar to ordinary people. Now, before you hear $250,000 net worth and assume that sounds relatively comfortable, you need to understand what most of that money actually is. It is not cash sitting inside investment account, and it is not a giant portfolio quietly compounding while somebody relaxes on a beach. The majority of middle-aged wealth in America exists inside housing equity, which means the statistic looks impressive on paper while feeling much less impressive in everyday life. That is the entire illusion. Suppose a couple bought a house in 2013 for $260,000, and that same house is now worth over $500,000 because housing prices exploded during the last decade. Statistically, that couple suddenly appears much wealthier even if their daily financial stress barely changed at all. Because home equity is not spendable money in the way people pretend it is. You cannot buy groceries with kitchen countertops, you cannot pay utility bills with drywall, and you cannot solve a medical emergency by showing somebody screenshots from Zillow. The only way to access that wealth is to sell the house, refinance the mortgage, or borrow against the property, and every one of those options creates another financial problem immediately afterward. Selling the house means you still need somewhere else to live in a housing market that became dramatically more expensive. Refinancing extends debt further into the future, while borrowing against the property means paying interest to access your own money. This is why so many Americans technically look wealthy while emotionally feeling broke at the exact same time. Most of their wealth exists inside the walls surrounding them rather than inside accounts they can comfortably use to stabilize everyday life. And once you remove home equity from the equation entirely, the financial picture becomes dramatically less impressive almost immediately. Now, we need to talk about retirement savings because this is where the conversation becomes genuinely uncomfortable for millions of people. Financial companies love publishing retirement benchmarks because benchmarks sound clean, organized, and mathematically elegant. By age 40, you should have several times your salary invested. By age 50, you should have 6 times your income saved. And by age 60, you should be approaching numbers large enough to create complete financial independence. The problem is that these benchmarks often sound completely disconnected from the emotional reality of modern middle age. Because the median retirement savings for Americans in their late 40s is nowhere near those targets. Many households in this age range have retirement accounts somewhere between $60,000 and $150,000 total, which means countless people are sitting dramatically behind the financial goals they constantly hear about online. And millions of Americans have almost nothing saved at all. Not because they were irresponsible with money, and not because they spent decades living recklessly, but because middle age became financially overcrowded in ways previous generations did not fully experience. People in their 40s today are trying to save aggressively for retirement, while simultaneously paying mortgages, supporting children, helping aging parents, managing healthcare costs, and recovering from years of inflation that quietly made ordinary life far more expensive than it used to be. Retirement advice sounds simple when somebody explains it using spreadsheets and optimistic stock market charts. Real life is much messier than a spreadsheet. Real life is paying for braces during the same month your car suddenly needs repairs while your insurance premium increases again for reasons nobody fully explains. Real life is staring at your retirement contribution percentage and thinking, I know I should increase this, but I honestly do not know where the money would come from anymore. That emotional exhaustion defines modern middle age far more accurately than any retirement benchmark ever could. Economists now use a phrase called the sandwich generation, and the name is disturbingly accurate because millions of middle-aged Americans feel financially crushed between two responsibilities pulling them in opposite directions. Parents above them, children below them, and middle age sitting directly in the center trying not to collapse. Millions of 45-year-olds are currently helping aging parents while still financially supporting children or adult kids. Some are helping cover assisted living expenses while simultaneously paying college tuition. Some are supporting adult children who move back home because rent became impossible. Others are trying to build retirement savings while managing healthcare debt for family members at the same time. Imagine trying to aggressively invest for retirement while helping your mother pay for memory care and your son pay for textbooks during the exact same year. That is not financial planning anymore. That is survival under pressure. And this is why so many middle-aged Americans feel strangely guilty all the time, even when they are objectively working hard and earning decent money. They are doing many things correctly while still feeling permanently behind because modern adulthood became structurally expensive in ways that are difficult to fully explain to people outside this stage of life. An income that sounded rich 20 years ago now often feels like controlled instability wearing professional clothing. There is another reason many 45-year-olds feel financially disoriented, and almost nobody discusses it honestly because it makes the entire system look unfair. Timing mattered enormously. The years following 2010 became one of the greatest wealth-building periods in modern history. Cheap mortgages, rapidly rising stock markets, exploding housing values, and historically low interest rates created extraordinary opportunities for people positioned correctly during that period. But many people currently in their mid-40s were not positioned correctly at all. When the economy collapsed in 2008, they were already adults carrying responsibilities. Many were dealing with layoffs, stagnant wages, debt, delayed career growth, or housing instability. By the time many households regained stability and accumulated enough money to seriously invest or purchase homes aggressively, prices had already surged upward dramatically. The easiest years to build wealth passed by while millions of middle-aged Americans were simply trying to recover financially. This is why modern financial advice often feels emotionally insulting without meaning to. People are constantly told they should have invested earlier without anyone acknowledging that many spent those exact years trying to survive economically after one of the worst financial crises in modern history. Two people can work equally hard across different economic periods and end up with completely different financial outcomes simply because the environment underneath them changed. That reality matters more than many people realize, because countless financially responsible Americans quietly feel like failures when they are actually experiencing the consequences of timing and economics rather than personal irresponsibility. Now, we need to talk about something many people secretly hope will eventually stabilize their future: inheritance. A huge number of Americans quietly assume some future wealth transfer from parents will help close the retirement gap later in life. Maybe there will be a paid off house, maybe there will be investments, or maybe there will simply be enough money to remove some of the pressure that has followed them through middle age. But statistically, that expectation is much less reliable than people imagine, because long term healthcare costs are consuming enormous amounts of wealth before inheritance ever happens. Assisted living, nursing care, medical treatment, prescriptions, dementia support, and end of life healthcare expenses slowly drain retirement savings over years. Many families that once expected to pass down meaningful wealth are now spending those assets simply trying to survive old age safely. And most inheritances are much smaller than people imagine anyway. The truly massive wealth transfers happening over the next few decades are concentrated heavily among families that were already wealthy to begin with. Most middle class households are not receiving life changing inheritances capable of rescuing retirement entirely. A moderate inheritance can absolutely help somebody breathe easier financially for a while, but it usually does not fundamentally transform their long term future. At this point, many people watching this video are probably doing mental math without realizing it. Maybe your number is above the median. Maybe it is below. Maybe most of your wealth exists inside your house. Maybe your retirement savings feel painfully small compared to the benchmarks constantly repeated online. But here's the most important thing I want you to understand. The average 45-year-old in 2026 is not secretly wealthy. They are financially stretched, emotionally exhausted, asset heavy, cash light, and trying to build stability inside an economy that became dramatically more expensive while nobody was paying attention carefully enough. That is the real picture, not the millionaire headline. The real middle-aged American experience looks much more ordinary and much more stressful than the statistics suggest. And if you feel behind financially, you are very far from alone. Now, here is the part many people desperately need to hear. Being behind financially does not mean being doomed permanently. That distinction matters enormously because although many middle-aged Americans are underprepared for retirement, according to traditional benchmarks, they still possess something incredibly valuable: time. Not unlimited time, and certainly not as much time as somebody starting at 25 years old, but still enough time for compounding to matter in a meaningful way. A 45-year-old who consistently invests during the next 20 years can still dramatically improve their future compared to somebody who emotionally gives up and stops trying entirely. The math may not create private jets, yachts, and beachfront mansions, but it can absolutely create stability, flexibility, and dignity later in life. And honestly, for many people, that is the real goal now. Not becoming rich enough to impress strangers online, becoming financially stable enough to sleep peacefully at night without constant anxiety. Because modern middle age is not really about chasing luxury anymore. It is about chasing relief from financial fragility and the exhausting feeling that one unexpected emergency could destabilize everything you spent decades trying to build. And once you stop comparing yourself against distorted millionaire averages, that goal suddenly becomes much more emotionally achievable. The number you have today matters far less than the direction your financial life is moving over time, because retirement is not determined by one terrifying headline or one disappointing account balance. Retirement is determined by thousands of ordinary financial decisions, repeated quietly over decades while life continues happening around you every single day. The average 45-year-old is not failing because they are lazy, irresponsible, or incapable of managing money correctly. They are surviving one of the most financially complicated periods modern middle-class adults have ever experienced. And despite all of that pressure, millions of them still wake up every morning, go to work, pay their bills, help their children, support their parents, contribute what they can to retirement accounts, and continue trying to build a stable future anyway. That reality matters far more than the headline ever will.